Okay, so in this last video, we can now put everything we've said together and come up with a way of describing the form of an argument, where we can describe an argument in a really compact form. So the idea of how to find the form of an argument is really simple. Now that we know what an atomic or a simple sentence is, you find all the atomic sentences in the argument and you replace them with letters. And you replace the same atomic sentences with the same letters and different atomic sentences with different letters. Let me just write that down. To find the form, you replace the atomic sentences or sends with letters. I'll use lowercase letters. And the same atomic sentence always has to be replaced with the same letter. The same sentence, same letter. Different sentences, different letters. Okay, so that's the procedure. It's pretty simple. Let's see this in action. So I'm going to go back to one of the arguments we saw in one of the earlier videos. So the one about me in Lubbock. So if David Boylan is in Lubbock, he's in Texas, David Boylan is in Lubbock, so he's in Texas. That's our argument. And now we're going to find the form of the argument. And the way we do that is we replace the atomics with letters. So it's good to look at the whole argument first, rather than just jumping in and looking at the individual sentences. Look at the whole argument and count how many atomics are there. And clearly we can see in this argument there are two. We have David Boylan is in Lubbock. That's one sentence, it occurs twice. And then we have he's in Texas. And if you think about it, there aren't any other atomic sentences. Every other sentence contains other sentences as parts. So the first premise, it's a different sentence, it's a bigger sentence, and it contains other sentences as parts. It's not atomic. So then we can just go ahead and start replacing sentences with letters. So I'm going to put P here. I'm going to replace P. And it's good practice to take one sentence and replace it everywhere in the argument. And then do the same for the last one. If P, let's go up here, Q. Generally, I'll hang on to the so just to keep a. Generally, I'll hang on to the so just to make sure we continue to know what's the conclusion. So the form of this argument is if PQ, P, so Q. Now, remember earlier on, we saw these two arguments. We saw the other argument about Joey and Ross and their professions. If you went through and you did the same thing, what you would find is that they have the same form. Now, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to take too much time doing it. But do it yourselves, and you'll see that the argument that we talked about earlier has exactly the same form by this reasoning. So what this argument tells us, the form of the argument is, we have one premise, where we have a sentence P and Q, and we're combining them using the if-then. We have P as our second premise, whatever P was here, and then we have Q as our conclusion. That's what it is to say that an argument is of this form. You have two sentences, P and Q. They're combined with if-then in one premise. P is the second premise, and then Q is the conclusion. But obviously, this is a much more sort of compact way of writing that idea down. I'm going to do one more example of finding the form of an argument. Even though it's very simple, I just want to do one slightly more complicated example, just to show you some places that you might slip up. Let's say if Ross is not an actor, Joey is. And let's just to make it a little bit more complicated, say either Joey is an actor. Say he's either he's not an actor, or he's a bad actor. And then finally, let's say maybe to make as our conclusion, Joey is a bad actor. Okay. So slightly more complicated. We're going to do exactly the same thing though. We're going to start off, we're going to look at the argument, we're going to see which are the atomic sentences, and we're going to make sure we replace them the same way. Now you might be tempted to say, so there are in fact 3 different atomic sentences here. One of them is Joey's a bad actor. But we have to be careful about what the other 2 are. So you might say, so clearly Joey is an actor, that's an atomic sentence as well. Sometimes people will say Ross is not an actor, that's an atomic sentence. But is that right? Is that really an atomic sentence? Remember what we said our connectives were. One of the connectives I said was not, because you can combine not with a sentence to make a new sentence. Now, sometimes people forget because it's placed in the middle of the sentence, but not really is a connective. So in this case, Joey is not an actor. That's not our atomic sentence. Our atomic sentence is, sorry. So Ross is not an actor. That's not our atomic sentence. What is the atomic sentence is the sentence Ross is an actor. So when we start replacing sentences with letters, we're going to keep the not, and we're going to remove the rest of the sentence and leave a letter behind. The same thing goes with Joey is not an actor. Joey is not an actor. That sentence is not atomic. It contains a connective. If you contain a connective, you can't be atomic. Remember the definition. So there are 2 atomic sentences in our second premise as well, but the 2 atomics are Joey is an actor and the other one is he's a bad actor. Joey is not an actor, that's not an atomic sentence. So let's start replacing these. So we've said we have 3 different atomic sentences. Let me start with one of the easy ones. He's a bad actor. I'm gonna replace that with R. So that's going to be R. We know we have the same one here. Let's next do Joey is an actor. I'm going to let that be Q. And now we know we need to replace it in this sentence as well. And we have to be careful here to leave the not behind. Because not is not part of the atomic sentence. It can't be, it's a connective. So the form of the second premise is not Q or R. And then finally, we need to do the same thing with the last one. Ross is not an actor. Again, we've got to be careful to keep the not. I'll put it back in a second. I'm going to replace that with P. And so the form of the argument is this. I'll just move it around so that it's sort of aligned. Form of this argument is if not P, then Q, not P or Q, so R. That's the form of this argument. And so the point of that example was to make sure you see that not is not part of the atomic sentences. You leave the not behind when you're finding the form of the argument. Okay, so we started this lecture talking about validity and soundness. We said what the difference between soundness and validity is. Then we introduced this idea of the form of the argument and its connection to validity. And while we were able to see that 2 arguments of the same, we can kind of see when 2 arguments are of the same form, but now we have a way of describing this. We have a way of writing down what the form is. And now what we know is something like if we have an argument of this form, Either all arguments of this form are valid or they're not valid. They always go together. So what we're going to be doing next week after this is we're going to be thinking about argument forms. Which ones are valid? Which ones are not valid? And we're going to start developing methods for finding out, methods for proving when arguments are valid and when they're not valid. And to do this, we're going to have to introduce a special logical language, which is going to be called propositional logic or truth functional logic. So that's what we're going to be doing going forward after this.